Hello, I'm Sean, one of the hosts of RfR Stories Australia. Greetings to you from Perth in Western Australia to wherever you are. Recovering from Religion is a global non-profit organization that offers hope, healing, and support for those who are struggling with issues of doubt or disbelief, or who have otherwise been affected by religious trauma. We're very excited to welcome you to RfR Stories, a podcast series where we interview people who have transitioned out of religion and give them space to share their stories in more detail. These are long-form interviews that can, depending on the story, go on for a few hours. We sometimes touch on sensitive topics, so listener discretion is advised. Also, any opinions or views expressed on the podcast are those of individuals and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoint of recovering from religion in general. Thank you for being here and joining us for this interview. We hope you enjoy the program. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of RfR Stories. I am Sean, one of your hosts, joined today by Jonathan. Jonathan, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Sean.
And Sallyann.
Great to be here.
So for those of you who are new to the series, RfR Stories is this wonderful podcast series that we've started where we'll be interviewing people at length and hearing them tell their story with regards to their religious experience. So what happened in their life, and in particular, emphasizing the journey that they went through, both in and traveling out of the religion. And today we are very privileged to be having the opportunity to interview Sallyann and to hear her story. Sallyann, we're very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great actually to have the opportunity to tell my story. I think over the years I've sort of told it in bits and pieces to different people, but to actually kind of sit down and put it together and sort of start to finish, I don't know what that's going to sound like, but let's give it a go.
Well, we're really looking forward to going through this, and you're well prepared. You brought some notes.
Always have notes.
Yeah.
Don't do anything without notes.
Awesome.
Everybody who knows me knows I have notes.
Yeah. You have notes on the notes, right?
Yep.
I'm very excited because I've heard lots of little bits of your story, but I've never heard it from beginning to end.
Yeah. I don't know how fascinating it is, but it's my story, and everybody's story is different, isn't it? So hopefully there's parts of it that sort of resonate with other people as well. I think that's when I was sort of looking for stories of people who had a similar experience to me when I was really struggling with feeling alone in my own sort of process of leaving religion. I really just listened to lots and lots of stories to try and find ones that felt close to mine. And that was really important for a time. Yeah, for a period of time, it was really important for me. So hopefully some of this can be just helpful for somebody else.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
So, Sallyann, how did it all start for you?
Well, it all started in 1970. About 100 years ago, or 120. So I was born in Ireland, as most people who hear my accent work out. Well-preserved accent, having lived here in Perth, Australia for 27 years almost. So I've lived longer here than I lived in Ireland. So yes, I was, oddly enough, born into a Roman Catholic family.
Fancy that?
Fancy that, yes. Not a terribly devout Catholic family. I mean, from the point of view that we went to Mass and we kind of did the things that Catholic families do, and we had a priest in the family and we had a nun in the family, like a lot of good Irish families then. But during the 1970s, this sort of movement happened in Ireland. It was called the Charismatic Movement. I think probably it was more referred to as the Jesus movement in the US. And really what happened in the Catholic Church was there was this sort of move of the Holy Spirit. And my mum, who had always been questioning and had never been satisfied with the Catholic Church and the answers that she got there, through this charismatic movement became a born-again Christian. And then when I was 8 years old, I went away to a Bible club camp, and I became a Christian there myself. And at the ripe old age of 8, when you can make those big decisions about life with, a lot of critical thinking.
And fully informed
consent. That's what I decided at 8 years old.
Incredible. What was the Bible camp like?
Oh, I loved it. It was great fun. And I think the theme of it was like, yes, the theme was becoming a soldier in God's army, which really appealed to me because I was a bit of in those days they called a tomboy. So I loved this idea that I could become a soldier in God's army and, and fight for good and all this kind of thing. So I do remember, actually, there was this sort of game they used to play with all the kids where I can't remember what it was called, but you'd sort of start with your Bible was like a sword and you'd kind of hold it in a position and then you'd be like, I don't know whether your sword was in the sheath and then you withdrew your sword and you lifted up into the air and then the person, like the leader, would call out a Bible verse and you had to like race to get to the Bible verse the quickest. I always remember because I was really good at that game.
Nice.
That's how I remember it. And so, I knew my Bible verses quite well. So for me, that was the moment in time that I became a soldier in God's army. And from that day onwards, for a long time, I never questioned that. Mm-hmm. It never occurred to me to question it. So my siblings, I have an older sister and a younger brother, and my siblings also became Christians. I think my brother would say he was 5 years old when he made the decision to repent of all of his sins.
Oh, as many as a 5-year-old could carry,
absolutely, right? Absolutely. There'd be a lot of them by 5.
So many.
So many. Yeah, he was a naughty boy. And then my sister also. And then a few years later, my dad followed. He became a Christian as well. But it was quite a number of years later. And so as a family, our family unit, we got involved in what was called an evangelical church, but it wasn't evangelical in the sense of what we now think of as sort of evangelical Pentecostal. It was evangelical from the point of view, it was very Bible-based. So it was very literal. So the Bible is the inspired word of God. It is inerrant. And everything that's written in the Bible happened exactly the way it was written. So we went to this church that was elders, men, of course. And it was all very, honestly, it was very boring because it was just, singing hymns. Some fuddy-duddy man would get up and preach and then sing more hymns. Can't even really remember. And at the age of, when I was 14 and my sister was 16, we kind of turned around to our parents and said, look, we don't want to do this anymore. There's got to be more to than this for church and, living out and our experience of, being a Christian. And so my parents kind of listened to us and we started going to, I think we tried a couple of churches, but we ended up in a church called the Apostolic Church. The Apostolic Church was a church that started back in Wales during the time of the Welsh Revival. Don't ask me when that was, but sometime in the early 1900s maybe. That's
where a lot of the different...
It all kind of started then,
that wave of Christianity all happened sort of late 1800s, early 1900s. That sounds about right.
And so we went to the Apostolic Church, which was actually in Dublin, and we're from just a bit out of Dublin, but we travelled into Dublin because in Ireland in those days there weren't really a lot of you were either Catholic or Protestant. There wasn't really much outside of that. So found this church and it was very different to the one that we'd been going to. It was very Holy Spirit stuff. So speaking in tongues, prophecy, women running around with flags, flag waving. Yeah.
Oh,
have you heard of the flag
I've
waving?
I've never heard of flag waving in church before.
Flag waving was a thing, yeah. Obviously, it's gone out of fashion, which is a very good thing.
What flags were being waved?
I don't even know. I don't think it really mattered. It was just they would run around like with these flags, just waving them during worship.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, look.
That's so interesting.
Quite a lot of people thought it was a bit weird, but this stuff goes on in churches. The weird stuff goes on and you just kind of go, oh, well, yeah, they're doing their thing. I'm not into that, but whatever. And then there was prophecy and, tongues and interpretation of tongues, and there was worship with a band and all that kind of thing. So that church was led by a pastor who was a Welsh pastor. So he'd been kind of sent out from Wales to pastor this church in Dublin. And the setup of that church, again, very much a patriarchal sort of culture. So he was the pastor, and then there were elders who were men. And so what happened was we went to the church in Dublin for some time, and then they planted another church out closer to where my family lived. And we moved to that church. My parents were elders, and so then I think, probably this happened in, over a long period of time, but another pastor came out from Wales to sort of pastor pastor is a noun and a verb, to take over the church in Dublin. And then the existing pastor moved to the other church, that the new church was like a church plant. And we went to that church as well. So that's where it all started to get a bit weird. There had been weird stuff going on. I will just define weird in a second. There was some weird stuff going on at the church in Dublin, where there were people in the middle of a service, people like during worship time particularly, there'd be like this random person who'd just start screaming, like these blood-curdling screams in the middle of the service. And then the pastor and some other elders would kind of rush around to this person and start telling the demons to leave, commanding the demons to leave. So there'd be this whole thing that was kind of happening while worship was going on.
Okay.
I know.
It must have been terrifying for young kids.
It must have been. I mean, I would have been... Actually, no, have I got that right? Was I 14? Yes, no, I think I was 14, 15. It's funny what you don't remember. I don't remember it being terrifying. It was almost like... I must have thought, well, this is weird.
Do you mind me asking, what kind of... do you remember kind of the mental state you were generally in during, like, worship?
Look, as a child, now looking back, I see I was quite an anxious child. I was very quiet. I was often scared of going to new situations. I remember when I was in primary school, so we went to a convent school in primary school, and my sister's classes were kind of across the road in another building, and I think I would only have been maybe 7 or 8. I used to get really upset at like recess and lunchtime and beg for the nun to take me to see my sister. So I remember this nun, she used to grab me, Sister Camilla was her name. She used to hold me by the arm and like kind of dig her fingers into my arm all the way across while she was walking me over to see my sister. So I was that kind of a child. I was quiet, and I do remember as a child, I always had a sense that I didn't quite fit in. So I had friends, but I didn't have a lot of friends, and I definitely was intimidated by social sort of circles. My sister, who's 2 years older than me, was always very outgoing. So I always felt like it was my sister, and then I was just her sister, if you know what I mean. It was like, I just don't want to say her name. So it was just you and her sister. So I felt like, I almost felt like I was just kind of a bit of an observer a lot of the time, and that I just took it all in. And I don't know, as a child, it was the norm in a way. I didn't know anything differently. There was very much sense in that church, and I would say within my family too, that we had the truth. And the Catholics, in our view, were not Christians.
Yep.
The Protestants weren't really Christians either, because you were only a Christian if you'd gone through those steps of, repenting from your sin, or acknowledging you're a sinner, repenting of your sin, and then giving your life over to Jesus and having this personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. That was the focus. It was all about that. And interestingly enough, the other thing that sort of came up for me as I was kind of preparing for this was it was the church setup that we were in was very patriarchal. But Ireland is actually quite a matriarchal culture. So Irish women tend to be, and obviously this is generalization, but tend to be quite strong. They tend to be the ones who kind of have a lot of the say of what goes on in the home and in the family. And the pastor of this church obviously thought this was wrong, because men are supposed to be in charge and women are supposed to be submissive. So then it started to become that a lot of women, in fact, most people in the church started being identified with having some demons in them.
Oh my.
And mostly it was demons of control, because women were controlling and they needed to submit. So the whole thing was wrong. So in my family, my mum was very much the spiritual leader of our house. And, she was very passionate about her faith. My dad's a different kind of character, but it was like they were told then that they had to kind of become, Mum was told she had to become submissive. Well, she's not a submissive type. And then my dad was supposed to be this, spiritual leader. And it just didn't seem to be the way that they were. But we were kind of in this church, and my parents were very involved, very passionate about their faith, and still are very passionate and very devout as Christians. And so then when we planted this new church, this is the best bit of the story. I've told so many people this, and when I tell them, they're like, they can't believe it. And in fact, in the beginning, when I tell people, I just gloss over it. So when we got a new building, we got a building that was an old office building and converted it. So the pastor was heavily into like converting buildings, and he had done some of that in the past. So he's very handy and got everybody on board. We did the building fund thing, and they converted this building into, to make it suitable for a church. And because there was so much problem with demons and people needing demonization, they made one of the rooms a deliverance room.
Oh
and actually, it had padded walls inside.
Oh, no.
I am not kidding.
Like an asylum or something.
It was right beside the creche as well, which is quite funny.
Oh, my goodness. Just all those demons can leave the demonized and just hop into the kids'
children.
I'm presuming it was pretty effective, because I'm hoping the kids at the creche couldn't hear it, but padded cell.
Wow.
So you'd have deliverance sessions in there for hours.
My goodness. That's intense.
And interestingly enough, before that happened, because they didn't really have a church for a while. They were kind of meeting. Oh, that's right. Before the building was ready, we were meeting in like a YMCA or whatever.
Yep.
But they still wanted to have these house group meetings in the week. And my parents had quite a big house. And they'd have deliverance sessions in our study of the house. So I remember being like doing my homework and hearing these deliverance sessions going on downstairs.
What's a deliverance session involved?
Walk us through the process of deliverance.
Conveniently enough, I never had deliverance ministry. And I'll come back to what happens in deliverance.
Possessed.
I was never possessed. I believe the reason for that was I started dating the pastor's son. And it wouldn't really have been very convenient if I had demons. All my family did. Like my mum, my sister, apparently. Other people did. But not me. I managed to avoid that. I tell you what, though, righteous, scared out of I was terrified.
Did your family talk about like their deliverance or their demons or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it was all about spiritual warfare. Yeah. It was all about it. Absolutely believed that Satan is real and he has demons. Now, it's not that, and it was very interesting language. It's not that you were demon possessed. You still had the Holy Spirit living in you. But because of certain behaviors in life, certain things maybe you'd watched on television,
Yeah.
books that you'd read, if you'd been involved in drugs, if you'd ever done like a Ouija board. That was massive in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Ouija boards were the thing. Every party you'd go to as a kid, somebody would pull out, like a sleepover, they'd pull out the Ouija board. Anything, really. And that was the problem. It was like anything that you might have seen or done or thought, it was like, oh, you've just opened the door to the enemy. So you could open the door to particular demons. And so you'd have to have those cast out. So I was never in the padded cell room. But I did hear it happening. Yeah. And I did obviously see it happening in the church when it would happen in the middle of a worship service. It was actually really awful now that I look back and think about what happened. It was like this person who was being delivered would be like writhing on the floor and they'd be screaming in different voices and saying things like, speaking to the pastor who would then be kind of trying to say, in the name of Jesus, get out. Now, shouting really loud. He had a really loud voice. So it'd be really aggressive, really angry, like, in the name of Jesus, get out, get out. And it would be like, this person would be like, who had the demon would be speaking back, as in saying, I don't know, you'd hear these horrible voices. It's like a bad movie, actually.
Yeah.
A bit like a horror movie of like Exorcist, which I've never watched The Exorcist or anything because, first of all, we wouldn't have watched that because it's not a movie, it's real life. It happens in real life. And now, since then, I don't want to ever watch anything like that anyway. And it could go on for a long time because if the demon was resisting being cast out, if it had been there for a long time.
I see.
And it was like and it could be that there were like more than one demon.
Yeah.
So one demon would go, and then maybe the person would speak in a different voice and there'd be another demon.
That's so interesting.
There's like a queue forming inside this person's psyche. The name of Jesus isn't what it used to be. And then exorcisms are a little bit slow nowadays.
That's so interesting. What do you think? What do you think the people who are like coming up with these demon voices and such, like, What's your take on what's
going on in their head, like their psyche?
Well, I work in mental health now, and there's such a thing as psychosis.
And mental illness.
And mental illness. And I really do think that people were either just having an experience that was, because they were in an environment maybe where there was music, there was this kind of idea that we're all here together, that God is moving, the Holy Spirit is moving in this place and he's here to change us. So people are kind of open to that. And I do think that then for some people, that would have been a very emotional experience, particularly if they'd had quite a significant amount of trauma in their lives. And so for many people, particularly those spontaneous ones in the middle of a service, that might have just been an outpouring really of grief for that person initially, of, an overwhelm, maybe of some of that expression of the trauma in that kind of environment that felt maybe safe initially for them. But of course, when everything is sort of then labelled as this is a demon, then you go looking for demons.
Yeah.
And it became that, like, there were demons of control, there were demons of witchcraft, there were demons of this, it was almost like, name it, you've got a demon. And so even things like, I remember, my job in church quite a long time was the overhead projector.
Very nice.
So young people won't remember that time. That was where you put like a piece of transparent plastic with the words of the song on a piece of glass, and it shone up on the screen, and you had to move it. Obviously, as you went through verses and choruses, you had to move it. And
you'd scroll like the Star Wars script.
Exactly. Yes.
See, we had those in like middle school.
High school, me too.
Yeah. They were starting to phase out at the time I was at the end of my high school.
They're great. I love that.
They're great.
It gave me something to do in church, and it gave me something to focus on when things got a bit weird. But I remember that if you sneezed in church, there's this sense of anything like coughing or sneezing, because sometimes it would start with somebody coughing. I'm just remembering this now. It would start with somebody like coughing, like just, and then it would turn into this really, I'm not going to do it, but a really kind of icky sounding cough. So I was even afraid to cough or sneeze or anything at all. So I think there was a lot of anxiety for maybe a lot of people, I don't know, but certainly for me, I felt a lot of anxiety in church. And I always felt that I was always kind of vigilant about everything that I might have seen or done, or constantly checking, is my heart pure? Am I good enough? Well, not good enough, because I really took that message seriously, that I was a sinner. That verse in the Bible, I can't remember where it's from, that your good deeds are as filthy rags. And I've since learned it refers to period rags. So, of course, we have to refer to the lowest of the low rags, because anything related to women was deemed pretty awful in the Bible, pretty low.
Women and their weird
periods.
Cycles.
Yeah. Ooh, we don't talk about that stuff. And so I remember taking that really seriously. It's like that really stuck with me. And I really felt like, nothing that I do, like I could be the best. I remember saying to people, I could be the best person in the world and it wouldn't be good enough, because I'm still filthy in God's eyes.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
Yeah, it's not a great way for children to feel or think about themselves.
Yeah.
It's not really until I started to study child development when I was doing my psychology degree a long time later. And I did this unit on child development, and oh my gosh, just so much for me at that point was like, I can't believe the stuff that was told to me and the stuff that is still told to children about how they are when they're born. It's not like they've done anything. It's just they're born bad. They're born sinful. I suppose as well, having had my own children, I think that for me is I just can't imagine telling that. I did tell my own children that, because I was still a Christian when I had my own kids. And I don't think that message is told in a way that's, it's told in a loving way.
Oh, yeah.
It's not told in a way to abuse or hurt children, but nevertheless, it is damaging. And I think probably I was a particularly sensitive kid. I was quite sensitive. And so when I heard those things, I took them really seriously. I took them right into myself. And then I had to be a really great Christian. I had to be a very devout Christian. And that wasn't on the outside, because I was never into, we talked about this before, about evangelism. I think I was terrible at that, because I was so shy. But I knew I had to be the best witness for Jesus, that I could be. So I always knew that when I talked to somebody or met somebody, I had to tell them about Jesus, and that was, if I didn't, then they were going to hell.
Yep.
I mean, I had a responsibility here.
Yep.
And I took that really seriously.
That's a tremendous burden to place on a kid.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and God doesn't really take much responsibility for spreading his own word, does he?
No. Puts it all on us.
No, it's up to 7-year-old.
Yes, that's right. Sallyann, who has. It's so funny. I remember thinking later on in life, when I was an adult, that kind of feeling a bit ripped off that I didn't have this life that I could talk about that was before being a Christian. That this terrible life, and God transformed me, because I'm like, oh really, I didn't do anything really naughty before I was 8. And so, I do remember feeling almost envious of people who had this great, testimony, as they say, that was this dramatic sort of, oh, my life used to look like this, and I used to take drugs, and I used to do this, I used to go to discos, shocking, and listen to music, worldly music. Speaking of that, I did go through a phase in my teenage years of destroying all of my cassettes,
Yeah.
all of my worldly music. That was a phase that I think a lot of adolescents went through in the 80s. And I was like, I really enjoyed my music. But yes, I had to, that was the Lord convicted me.
Yep.
That was the big thing. The Lord convicted me that was worldly and I shouldn't be listening to it.
Did you, so with like the church experiences, were there like positive, I say positive, was there like speaking in tongues and that kind of thing in like the church you were going to as well? That kind of.
There was. And I had a few experiences of being prayed for, because to speak in tongues, generally you get like someone prays over you and then you get like just spontaneously speak in tongues. That's generally the way it happens. For some people it just happens spontaneously, apparently. It never happened for me.
Yeah.
And I actually had quite a bad experience with one of my parents and one of my siblings when we were at a big convention for the Apostolic Church, where this big sweaty pastor was praying for us, and he kept, like, they'd put their hand on your head and he kept pushing. You know the way, that's the other thing that happened, being slain in the spirit. That was another big thing.
Like falling over, like
Yeah.
you've been paralyzed
Yeah, so
kind
you've
of
been
thing?
slain in the spirit, and this Holy Spirit's power is so like powerful and overwhelming, you just go down onto the floor.
Yeah.
It's really funny. At a lot of Christian churches and conventions, they actually have people behind who are being, when you go up the front to be prayed for, they have catchers.
Yep.
So you don't bang your head, presumably.
Like
I think it's
trustful
hilarious.
type thing.
So, like, you're not priming anybody at all there for being, like, slain in the spirit. So
Yep.
I always thought this was weird, really weird as well. And I was like, that's not going to be happening to me anytime soon. Don't you try and slay me in the spirit. I was always, so I used to say I was cynical. Now, of course, I realize I was skeptical.
Yeah.
But I thought I was cynical because it was, I just asked too many questions. I had too many, like, I don't like that, And so we had this experience where this guy was like just really pressing on my head. Like I was a teenager, so I wasn't big, and he was this big sweaty guy. And he kept doing this, and I'm like, this is not going to happen. And didn't speak in tongues, did not get slain in the spirit. Very disappointed, because I was like, well, if God is going to do that, it's going to happen because God did it, not because this guy has literally pushed me over.
Yes.
So yeah, I never spoke in tongues. Or I say I never spoke in tongues. I used to always have this thing of, there's something wrong with me. I don't speak in tongues. And my husband spoke in tongues. And so one night I asked him to pray for me, and then I was able to speak in tongues.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to speak in tongues. I got this babbly phrase.
Yep.
That's what
Which
it
I can
is,
still
isn't
say.
it? Yeah.
Yep.
Which makes no sense at all. But in my mind, I was like, oh, phew, I've spoken in tongues. Great. Even though it was like only a couple of words. But then I felt like I'd achieved something, like I was
You were
okay
worthy.
now. But it never, this whole thing of where people say when you speak in tongues, it's this amazing language between yourself and God that, is just so like connects you to God. Nah, not for me.
Yep. Were you like, so were you skeptical / cynical, like, most of the time throughout, that church experience? Were you a bit more open to it at the beginning and became more skeptical later, or?
No, I was always a bit, I probably wouldn't have seen it then as even in the beginning as cynical. I think I became cynical because I saw that other people had these experiences that I didn't have. And, people would say, oh, God revealed this to me. It's another great phrase. Conviction, convicted and revealed. God revealed this to me, or God gave me a word, or I had this vision. And I remember rolling my eyes when people would stand up in church and go with these, God had given them like a dream or a vision. And they'd stand up and go, I see a stream. God is saying, you are that stream. And if you would just allow me to work in your life, you'll be able to flow pure and fresh like that stream. Okay, see, I've just made one up.
No, that's great.
That would have gone down so well.
So well.
So I used to hear people do that and go, come on.
A stream.
I mean, so I just think I was just very skeptical from the start. And so I'd see other people having experiences. And of course, then I put it down to, well, I don't have experiences because I don't believe enough.
Yeah, so that skepticism gets overrun by your sense of, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. And that's sort of self-hatred.
The other thing as well is maybe, I don't know, you tell me if you think this is a fair suggestion to make. Maybe you were less willing to fake it than other people were because you were waiting for the real deal.
The real deal.
You were waiting for the real, the Holy Spirit to descend on you.
Yeah.
And maybe by nature you're not as suggestible, as other people are. Because, we're all suggestible in some way or another. And that whole group psychology can sometimes kick in and people get carried away and they all take part in the thing. Which is the same way that like Ouija boards work. Yeah. It's all group psychology.
Wouldn't have worked for me either.
Exactly.
I was just all too like, no, I don't think this. I think, and I'm still very much like that as an adult and always have been. I just, and I suppose that's in a way where it eventually worked out in my favor. I eventually started to listen to that voice. But yeah, for a long time, that wasn't encouraged. And when I did ask questions, because it wasn't that I couldn't ask questions, when I did ask questions, I was guided back to the Lord. So if I didn't, if I wasn't sure about something, it was always that the answers could always be found if you just go back to the Lord. And so one of the biggest questions I used to have was, I'd sit in church, I'd hear a message, or I'd hear somebody talk about something, and I'd go, okay, cool, yeah, okay, that sounds good. Now tell me how. And that was the bit that nobody could ever really answer. That was the bit where you get, well, you just have to go to the Lord and you've got to, really spend time in his word and really reflect and pray and draw close to the Lord. And I'm like, what does that mean? What do you mean? And that's where I would get that, like, because all the other stuff I was like, yeah, cool. All right. You're telling me this is a good, this is look to the Lord for his will for your life. Okay. Look to the Lord for his plan, because, the Lord gave me that verse in Jeremiah 29:11, which I think he's given to everybody as their special verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. And so that was my verse. So it was like, I kept going back to that and I'm like, yeah, great, cool. Happy to go with that. But can you just tell me what they are? Like, just give me a bit of an inkling. And it was just, then I'd have to kind of I'd look for God's voice, but then there was always this kind of, I think that was just me. Oh, I think that maybe that was just me. How do I know it was God? Whereas other people, particularly my mum, but, the pastor, the people in church, they just knew God's will. Like, they were so convinced and certain and sure. And I was always chasing that certainty, that I really needed that certainty. Yeah. Because I think I was so anxious, really, and worried about I was worried about being wrong. Yep. Because it was really important for us to be right. Yeah. It was really important for our family to be right, for our church to be right. I mean, they'd even criticize people. Like, this was within the church and the church leadership. They'd criticize people from other churches that were also like Pentecostal type churches. So they also didn't have the right version. There was so much judgment and criticism. And there was so much, I remember, so I was obviously dating the pastor's son, and I'd go back to their house and there'd be all this like talking about people. They'd be talking just about people, gossiping about... And I would hear information about people's problems that I shouldn't have been hearing about. Yeah.
Stuff that was said in confidence to the pastor. And I was hearing about.
And I knew all this stuff that I should not have known about people's lives, but I was within the inner circle now. Yep. The other interesting thing that happened within that church was, so I'm now married to the pastor's son. We dated for 6 years and we got married. But in that family, they don't have my husband has 2 brothers, so there's no girls in their family.
Yep.
And his mother was very much the submissive wife. So it was all about the boys. And my husband's father, who's the pastor, he was very much in control. And he was the boss in all things. Mm-hmm. So when I kind of came into that family, like they sort of made me theirs in a way, and subtly sort of turned me against my own family. So they'd tell me things about my parents, like that my mother had a spirit of control, and that they weren't like they would put my family down to me, so that I got to the point where I was really critical of my own parents. I would tell them things, like obnoxious teenagers anyway, but I also I wasn't a rebellious teenager at all. I was the good child. I was the easy child until I started becoming really obnoxious and like judgmental about my own parents. And so, I very much became part of my boyfriend's family and became quite submissive. So just to give you an example of how it was for women in the church. So there was a period of time where, the pastor's wife never wore trousers. And so she was an example to all the other women. So we were encouraged not to wear trousers. So I went through a period of just wearing skirts. So in the 80s, like patterned tights, like pantyhose, I think Australians use the word tights. I should know that by now. I've lived here for long enough. Just like sheer tights with like spots on them or little lines or whatever. They became really fashionable in the 80s, and they were a no-no in the church. So the pastor's wife didn't wear those, and she discouraged all the other women from wearing them, obviously because they would draw the attention to the leg. So longer skirts, kind of to the calf. We were encouraged to wear headscarves or head coverings for women in the service.
Wow.
Women were allowed to stand up and prophesy and speak in tongues and do that kind of thing. Women... Did they preach? It was always men preaching on Sundays. Women could teach women and children. Of course, it was really only women teaching children. I don't think, or maybe some teenage boys might have been able to teach young children, that kind of thing. But the men were too important for that job. And it was very much like, I remember going to my boyfriend's house and the boys would all sit down, like they'd be watching sport. They were all big into sport. They'd all be sitting on the couch watching sport, and I'd be in the kitchen with my husband's boyfriend's mum, and we would be, preparing the dinner, and then we'd actually like serve them. Like,
oh wow,
yeah, it was very different to my family, because in my family we weren't like that. I had a younger brother, and there was none of that going on in my family. But in my husband's family, his name's Tim. In his family, it was very much, this is what, this is the model. This is how it should be. Women need to submit to men. And so sadly, that's what my husband grew up with. And that's what we got married with, this idea that that's how our marriage was going to be. So needless to say, that didn't go very well. Well, initially it went okay until I started thinking, I don't like this. This doesn't work for me. And that kind of started quite a long time after that, because it did take me a long time to really start questioning. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So can I just check in with the timeline? So I just want to confirm a few things to make sure I've heard them correctly from the beginning to now. So the first thing that struck me is that you actually went through 3 religions in your youth. You were raised, is that correct? Raised Roman Catholic. And then you transitioned to be, what was the name?
Kind of evangelical to
charismatic, and then to the Apostolic Church at age 14.
Yes.
And then as your teens went on, at which age did you start dating your boyfriend?
Started... Tim and I are 2 years and 2 months apart, and I am older. So we actually started dating in those 2 months apart, where I had turned 18 and he was 15.
Right.
Shocking. But don't worry, it's okay, because we were good Christian teenagers, okay? Very well behaved. And we had to, they didn't call it purity culture back then. Yep. That was I think the 90s, I think it started to have a name, but that's what we were living through, because I'd never had a boyfriend before that, because God had a man for me.
Yep.
And whoever that man was, we were not going to be having sex until we got married. Yep. So we dated for 6 years.
6 years.
That age group is also such a typical age group from like my and the sort of the time frame of like, it's a very very recognizable scenario. From my background as well.
There you go. Yeah. And that kind of messed me up quite a bit. Just that idea of, anything around sex. Now, anything around sex being wrong. And look, I'm going to bring up masturbation because you did the last time, Jonathan. I feel like it's going to be a bit of a theme.
Absolutely. No, it's important. It's very important.
I agree it's important, but it wasn't okay then.
No.
And so anything around, masturbation was a sin. So anything beyond... Now, it wasn't as bad as I have heard some people who have, like, they were literally not able to kiss until the day they got married. It wasn't that bad. But it was that, like, if because we were young and poor, had no money, didn't have jobs, we couldn't really go out anywhere. So any time we had on our own was just in like the front room of one of our homes. We had to leave the door open, of course, because you don't know what we might be getting up to in there.
Absolutely.
And so, and it's not that, like, my mum was very open with us around talking about, periods and sex and that kind of thing. So it wasn't like that was a no topic in our house. But also back then, nobody talked about consent. Nobody talked about healthy sexual relationships, because you'd figure that out when you got married.
Absolutely.
And it would, I do remember there was a book. Ooh, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it was the book that everybody was reading, like if you were married. I remember actually babysitting at somebody's house and this book was on the shelf and I had a sneak peek. But it was, all about what, marriage and sex in marriage, obviously, because that's the only sex, and obviously only between a man and a woman, because that's the only sex, heterosexual sex, of course.
Absolutely.
So, so it's really funny. We on our wedding night, I won't go into too many details about our wedding night, but we were in a hotel on our wedding night and sort of trying to, get things going.
Absolutely.
And the fire alarm goes off, so we had to evacuate.
Incredible.
Which I think was a bit of a relief for both of us, because we had no idea what we were doing.
Well, look, this is also a really common thing for young people. Young people, when they're trying to have sex for the first time, think it's going to be in like the movies where everything is just easy and smooth, and that's just not how things work in real life.
No.
It's awkward. There's a lot of negotiation. You're trying to you're kind of terrified first ever time.
Got no idea.
So it's like that's a very natural and normal experience for two young people who are exploring sexuality.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate that, like, so many religions make that even more difficult. They wrap a lot of shame around sexuality. They wrap a lot of, and that puts a lot of barriers between that very healthy, natural thing for like, young people to do when they're exploring sexuality and meeting people and doing that kind of thing.
That's right. All the things you're supposed to do in
Absolutely.
your adolescence and your young adulthood that, a lot of Christians or religious people just don't have the opportunity to learn. So I didn't have those experiences of being in relationships. I didn't know what I liked, what I didn't like, what I wanted, what I didn't want. I didn't even know who I was. Tim and I grew up together in a way. And really the foundation of our relationship was built on some very unhealthy dynamics and unhealthy sort of power and control kind of dynamics as well, because very much around, men want sex all the time. And if the man treats the woman as if the husband loves his wife the way that Christ loves the church, the assumption then is your wife is just going to respond. She's just going to want to have sex with you. So it's just so unhealthy.
And in its extremes, women are a kind of property of men, aren't they?
And men are entitled to it. And there is this kind of idea of ownership, that your body is not yours. Well, that's the whole thing about two becoming one.
Yeah.
And really, and Tim and I have had quite a lot of therapy over the years, but one of the things one of the therapists really was able to identify is that we were so enmeshed because we'd grown up together, really. We'd grown into adulthood together, and we were enmeshed in each other's lives. We hadn't individuated.
Yeah.
So this idea of us being individuals with our own wants, desires, needs, hopes, dreams, it was all like, well, but we're a couple and we're one, and this idea. And when I heard that, I was like, yes, I want to be my own person.
Yeah.
But that took a long time to figure that out. So when you've kind of grown up with this idea or this indoctrination that, no, first of all, you're not your own person. You're God's. So first of all, you're right down the bottom of the list. So because you can't trust yourself. You're taught not to trust. Lean not on your own understanding. So I really that was another verse that I held on to, is that I could never trust myself. And so but I always had God to go to, I always had the Bible to go to, or my mum to go to, because my mum was a very strong voice in my life, because she's a very passionate, strong believer. And so, it was always other people. And so then, when I got married, it was kind of like, then Tim sort of replaced. It was interesting because both my parents are firstborn children, and I had an older sister. And so I was surrounded by three maybe a generalization, a stereotype, very strong personalities, all with controlling tendencies, let's just say it that way.
Sure.
And then I married into a family, father-in-law extremely controlling, and Tim had controlling tendencies too. So not to the degree of not at all like his father, but still this idea that he was brought up with, that, there's that sense of, I'm the man, and this is the way it is. And obviously he's had to do a lot of work around that, which to his credit he has done.
And you get told as well, like, if you are not calling the shots, you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
Like, your poor wife is like, without strong leadership, which she desperately needs, of course.
That's right. And this was one real struggle with our relationship, was I kept wanting, because I really was the more spiritual one between Tim and me. And I used to give him such a hard time for not being the head of the household and not leading us spiritually.
Yep.
And that stuff as well, we had to work out afterwards. But then when I stopped believing, then I gave him a hard time and used to deride him for actually believing the nonsense that he still believed. Like, the poor guy just could not
Tim
win.
Can't catch a break.
He could not catch a break, the poor guy. So, it was like, I really wanted him to be this head of the household, because like it says it here in the Bible, we've been taught this, like, why are you not kind of stepping up? And Tim was like, but that's not who I am.
Yeah.
It's not me. And I was like, but it's supposed to be you, because who am I supposed to? I'm supposed to be following you. You're supposed to be leading the way. That was kind of confusing.
Yeah, would be. And like, especially if in some part of you is still that kind of, that sort of matriarchal culture, of like the strong women. And this is something that I've definitely there's a lot of, because my religion, very patriarchal. But again, you get that situation where a lot of women are like very strong personalities, and and you get that, I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
I have. Yeah.
There's a brilliant line where like the man is always saying, "Man is head of the household," and his wife goes, "Yeah," and she says quietly with all the other women, "Yeah, but women are the neck, and they can point the head any direction that they want."
Yeah.
And I feel like, and that was actually a joke that a bunch of women in my old religion would make.
Yeah.
And because it's and they would make it like in good fun, but it's kind of true as well. Like, and I think that is good in a way that finds a way,
Yes.
for like women who are wise and strong to like find a way to get leadership in some way in those
And
very
yet,
patriarchal
then
structures.
in the patriarchal structure, the men would call that manipulative.
Oh, of course they would.
So as soon as a woman would try to speak up or have a voice, well, she was now trying to undermine the man and the role of the man, because she has helpmeet. She's not supposed to do that.
Why do they need to be the neck? Why can't they just be another head?
Absolutely.
Right. Like
Agreed.
that. I think those are the words of the people who are oppressed.
Yeah.
Who are sort of trying to find the silver lining. in their position.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
why can't they just be of equal standing?
It's like that thing, that phrase, behind every good man is behind every something successful
man is a woman.
Well, it's like, why is she behind?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Why is she even referred to?
Yeah.
Like, go and make your own success and let her have her own success. And,
Yeah.
we don't say that anymore, thankfully.
Yeah. It's so strange what gets normalized, you know? A lot of that sort of patriarchal thinking has to be undone later.
And it gets internalized.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so difficult. Well, has been difficult for me to work. That's been a lot of the work, is working out what is internalized, that even though up here I think differently, I believe differently, I have particular opinions, but I still find myself at times behaving in a way of like going, hang on a second, Sallyann, why are you looking to that person for advice? Or why are you looking to that person for direction? Or why do you think somebody else in the room knows better than you? And why are you intimidated by that man speaking? That kind of stuff just pops up quite regularly. And I've obviously learned to be aware of that. But for a long time, that finding my voice, I didn't really feel like I had a voice. Not really in my family, and definitely not in the church, and definitely not in the religion. And of course, I think that created problems in my marriage when I started to realize I didn't have a voice. And then I started to use my voice, and I wasn't very nice in the way that I did that. Because, when you start to explore different ways of being, you often kind of go a little bit too far the other way, and I was angry when, I started to realize how harmful the religion had been. I was angry at everybody. I was just angry all the time. And I wasn't a very nice person to be around sometimes.
So I think that's true of all of us. And I think most people go through that angry phase. So in the timeline, you're married, and a lot of marriages can be quite difficult, I think, especially in the Christian context.
Yeah.
With that whole, which is the exact same kind of scenario in my old religion, where you spend all this time separate from the person, you get married, and now you're living together. You've had no chance to be roommates.
No.
You've had no chance to figure all that stuff out. So that first year of marriage can be really hard, and even meant years after that. So there's that. Where are we up to in the timeline?
Okay.
now?
And how old were you when you got married?
I got married at 23, and Tim was 21, and we looked like children in our wedding photos. He looks like he's about 12 in our wedding photos, actually. And I'm like, I should not have married that child. Was that legal? So
He'll thank those genes one day.
I think I might look younger than him now. Anyway, let somebody else be the judge of that. We actually moved to the UK. So we moved to live in Manchester because Tim was studying over there. So we were apart for some time. I left school and I was studying in Dublin, and then I got a job, and then he went 2 years later. He left school, he went to university in Manchester. In the meantime, his parents had moved back to Wales because the whole Apostolic Church thing in Ireland fell apart very badly. Irish people generally don't like being told what to do. We have a bit of a rebellious thing in us, which has kept us free of other nations conquering us. So
Absolutely.
we know how to fight back, us Irish. And some of the people in the church started to realize, hang on a second, something's not right here. And so they accused the pastor of control, of financial control, and other forms of control, and they sued the church. So as soon as that happened, it all fell apart, and the pastor and his wife and family went back to Wales. That
tails between their legs.
Well, at least they had somewhere to escape to. Yeah. My parents and the other people involved were kind of left there to deal with a lot of the mess. That lawsuit went on for about 7 or 8 years before it was settled. And that was people suing for items, for money that had been donated to the church for the building fund, tithes and offerings, all that kind of thing. So we got married, we lived in the UK for a few years, and then we came to Australia, which I wanted to come to Australia. I was like, let's go to Australia for a while, because with Tim's job at the time, the firm he was working for had firms all over the world. We're like, we just got married, let's go over there and enjoy something different. Because I had always wanted to live in another country. I'd studied French, like a lot of people in Ireland in the 80s. 80s was a big time of recession. So most people of my generation left Ireland for work, went to like Paris or London, maybe the US. I was going to go, but then Tim and I started dating, so I stayed in Ireland. So we ended up in Australia because we were like, yeah, let's go for 3 months, and just for the busy time for Tim's job. And looking back now, of course, we're able to now see that we were just escaping, trying to get as far away as possible from all of that, from our families, from just all of the blah that had just happened. And so when that happened, we didn't really go to church. We kind of found a church, sort of went off and on in Manchester when we were there, then came to Australia, went off and on. We're very wary about churches. I would always have said, oh no, my relationship with God is solid. But churches, they're full of really, awful people. And so we'd go to like a big church every now and then. We'd sit at the back. We wouldn't get into conversations with people. Very, very, And then we had a child. And so having children is like really kind of sort of, for me anyway, I'll just speak for myself. I think it was like now there was a sense of responsibility, and I'm like, now I'm responsible for another little person. And of course I wanted them to be a follower of Jesus. That's the biggest thing that I wanted for them. So we started going to a vineyard church here in Perth, which actually became a CCC church in the end. So Christian City Church. It's very similar to Hillsong. So
gotcha.
It has its headquarters in Sydney. They've done the kind of Hillsong thing with music. They've planted churches around the world, so very similar setup.
Are they kind of like big budget, big music?
Huge.
A little bit prosperity ministry type thing?
Yep, all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Conspicuous wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, got it.
All of that. So we started, and to be fair, I think the fact that church, where Perth is so far away from the East Coast, the pastors of that church kind of, although it became a CCC church, they kind of didn't run it a very typically CCC way. And initially when we went there anyway, it was a vineyard church, which didn't really mean much to us. But I have to say, we told the pastors there what we had experienced previously, because we went along and we thought, this is actually nice. There was a nice relaxed vibe about it. Didn't feel pressured. And I remember them saying to us, you just sit here for as long as you want and just soak it all in. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to participate. You just be who you are. And for us, that was so refreshing because we'd come from being, Tim being the pastor's son, me being an elder's daughter, to, being these people in this other church back in Ireland where you're always doing something. You always had to be volunteering. You were kept very busy. Whereas now we were being told, just recover, heal, get well. And we did. We really did. That was, there were, of course, things that happened that, now looking back, a lot of the teachings I wouldn't agree with, obviously. But that was not where the damage happened for me.
Yeah.
That was actually quite a healing experience for me and for us and what we needed at the time. So I had my first child. That was hard because we had only been out here for a year when we had our first baby. I just thought, people have babies all the time. I'll be fine. Let's have a baby. And we really had no support network, no family, of course. Didn't have a particularly easy birth. Breastfeeding wasn't going well. My son wasn't thriving, and I really wasn't coping at all. And it wasn't until he was 18 months old that I got diagnosed with postnatal depression. So, and I think nobody else recognized it in me because nobody had known me before because I was working before I had my baby, and then I made kind of new friends through the mothers group and that sort of thing. So nobody knew me pre-baby. They didn't know what I was like before that. And Tim had no idea because neither of us really knew what we were doing. He was working very long hours, building a career. I should say we came out here initially for 3 months and we went back to England. Then we came back out for 2 years, and that's when we had our baby. But we knew we were going to stay then. So that was 97. We came back out.
Yep.
My son was born in 98. And so I did recover from that. I attended a support group. I went on medication and I did recover. It took a while, obviously, because I'd really been depressed for a long time.
A year and a half is a very long time to go before getting that
Well, it was funny
diagnosis.
because I just thought that's what having a baby was like. And it was like, well, you've had a baby. What are you going to do? You just get on with it. But it was just me and my baby, 24 hours a day, just no help, no support, no daycare. There were daycares, but in my mind, it was like, no, my child's not going to daycare. Why would I do that? Because I'm going to be a full-time mum. And he was, he didn't do all the things that he was supposed to do as a baby. So a person I'd met at a mother's group suggested I do this parenting course called Growing Kids God's Way, which is a Christian course. Where you get your baby into a routine. And I did everything. And my baby just didn't really want to sleep. He didn't really want to feed. And it's funny because for some women who go through postnatal depression or postpartum depression, as they call it now, they find it difficult to bond with their baby. So for me, I didn't feel that. I loved my son to bits, but I thought that I of course put it back on myself. I wasn't ready for this. I was never into kids. I had no experience with babies. I didn't think I was very good with children. So I, of course, thought, I'm not this was a big mistake for me. I'm a terrible mother. This baby deserves better than me. So of course, that didn't help because that was sort of present a lot of the time. And, nothing I did was right. Nothing worked. Poor baby, he was, of course, picking up on my anxiety and my struggle, of course, which wouldn't have helped. But eventually I did get help, and I'm very grateful that I did. And somebody that I didn't know very well that I was talking to on the phone one time, I was telling them how I was feeling, and they were like, you know what, sounds like you might have postnatal depression. They recommended I go and see their GP, literally 10 minutes in her room with me in floods of tears. She diagnosed it. So really grateful to that person who suggested that. I can't remember who it was. Somebody I didn't even know that well, I think.
Sometimes you need that.
Amazing.
Sometimes you need someone who's far enough away from the situation.
Yeah, because apparently a couple of my friends had said stuff to me and I don't even remember. I just I just dismissed it.
Yeah.
So then we had another baby because I was like, well, I'm not having another baby until I'm really recovered from this. So we had another baby almost 4 years later, and I made sure that I was prepared for that. So
went a bit smoother.
Much smoother.
Yep.
Smooth birth. I was calmer. I was more relaxed. Kind of knew what I was doing at that stage, and that was much better. But after that, I started volunteering on. It was a good few years after she was born. So I probably would have been my mid-30s at that stage. I started volunteering on a helpline. So Sunshine Radio is a Christian radio station here in Perth. They used to have something called the Sunshine Care Line that essentially worked a little bit like a lifeline type of line, or the Samaritans, where people could ring in and talk to somebody about their problems, or if they just wanted to have someone to chat to. So I did that for about 4 or 5 years, actually.
Wow.
That must have been my early 30s. I did that. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And that just gave me a sense of maybe this is something I'd kind of like to do, because my previous career had been public relations and marketing. So not me. But I thought I wanted to do that because my dad worked in advertising and marketing, and I thought I want to do that too. Not my thing. And so I started to study a diploma of counselling. And I distinctly remember the day I had this epiphany. I don't know whether you call it that, but I must have been reading something about, it was one of my early units, and it was something about, are you going to be able to work with people non-judgmentally? So people who have different, religious, cultural backgrounds, who have different sexual orientations. And I was reading stuff going, yeah, of course, non-judgmental. I was, even though I thought most people were wrong, I didn't judge them in the sense that I thought that's not a barrier to me. I can still love people. And I don't think I was judgmental towards people. I really did see people as, equal. In that sense, I probably saw most people better than myself, because I didn't think much of myself, really. And I remember having a moment. It's so funny when you have these moments. You think it's so simple. Why did I not think about it before? I had this moment of like, okay, so if I believe that what I believe, about Jesus and my faith, that it's the truth, and I'm absolutely convinced of that. But there's millions of other people in the world and throughout history, not just living now, who are convinced that their belief system is the truth. How do I know that mine is actually the truth? And that was the first thought I had. Now, I did not give that much attention, because I was like, oh no, put that away.
Yeah,
Because it was all about, you just have to choose. That was the big thing as well for us. You have to choose to believe. So even when you doubt, even when your emotions try to lead you astray, you choose, because that's what faith is. It's a choice. Loving people is a choice. Faith in God is a choice at the end of the day. So I fought for years about this sort of these questions that I had that just kept cropping up. The typical one of, you start putting the thread on the jumper, and it was like I couldn't put that jumper back together. I tried so hard. And I think one of the things for me was I tried so hard not to lose my faith.
Yeah.
I did everything I could, and I kept going back, and like when I'd kind of go, no, I just don't think I believe this, I'd go back and I go, no, I do. I just have to choose to believe it. And I did so much work. I cried out to God. I asked God to show me in ways that would just mean something to me. It was funny, actually. I remember sitting on the beach near our house one day, and I was sitting and looking out over the ocean. And I was sitting, I think it was winter as well, actually. There was hardly anybody on the beach. It was a nice day, but I was sitting there on the rocks, and I was just crying. And I was like, God, please show yourself to me. Just show me something that's going to mean something to me. And I used to always say, this whole thing of, God would show people rainbows. People say, oh, I was sitting there and I saw a rainbow. Yeah. I remember thinking, it has to be a bit more than a rainbow for me. Rainbows just appear in the sky.
Yep. Yeah.
And this is, again, the real no-nonsense me and the cynical me. And as I was saying that, then this dolphin, was in the water there. And I remember looking at going, that's a lovely dolphin. I mean, because dolphins do swim in the ocean, a lot around where I live.
Flying.
It's not, no, it wasn't flying. And it didn't talk. And I remember looking at it, and I had this moment of being so disappointed, because I was like,
is that the best
oh
God can do?
If that's your sign, then you don't know me at all.
Yeah.
Because if you know me, that's not going to cut it.
We're going to need a burning bush.
Yeah.
We're going to need a fleece that's dry on one side and wet on another.
Something more than a dolphin in the Indian Ocean
We
in
need
Perth.
the big guns this time. We need the big guns.
But you know what? I gave him lots more chances.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
And
as you do.
just nothing.
You give
Just
God too many. We all, don't we all?
so many chances.
Too many chances.
And then I went to university, and that really messed things up. Because you're not supposed to go to university and study psychology, because now you're opening your mind up to the lies of Satan,
The philosophies
Yeah.
of men.
the ideas of
Yeah.
man, that you can
Yeah.
actually solve things on your own.
Yep.
And you can't. You need God. But I started studying psychology, knowing about the disapproval from certain family members. And
So let's check in. How old were you when you started studying?
I started studying psychology when I was 40. I had always regretted not going to uni.
Yep.
And I didn't go to university after I left school because I didn't study hard enough. But also there was a lot of stuff going on in the church at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a lot of focus on, like, God was the most important thing. And although education was still important in our family, I don't think education for girls was quite as important, at least university. And even in my mind, it was like, well, I mean, what's the point really? Because I'm just going to get married and have babies and then be a full-time mom. So
Yeah.
what's the point?
Yeah.
I'd also heard about a girl at the church who was studying English at university. And that was like, she was being exposed to some really dangerous ideas.
Ooh.
Like Milton's, what's Milton's?
Paradise
Thank you.
Lost.
Paradise Lost. I remember there being big
Yeah.
conversations in the church and in our family about, really dangerous ideas. So all of that, of course, was in my mind. But I wanted to go to university and study English and sociology. That's what I wanted to do. Didn't get into uni. And then I went off and did something else. And just then had children, thought, well, I'm never going to go to uni.
Yeah.
And then just started to think about going back to university. I could do it. Maybe I could do it. Maybe I could just start with a couple of units, just see how I go. And
you'd done the diploma, that kind of...
excuse me, I'd finished the diploma
Yep.
Of counselling?
of
was it?
counselling.
Yeah.
That's right. So that was like self-paced. So I could
Yes.
do that with the kids at home, because once they'd gone to bed, I could study at night. Luckily, I'm a nighttime person, so I could do that. And finished my diploma. And I remember what I was doing then. I think I was still working on the care line. Oh, no, I know what it was. I actually started volunteering at a family and domestic violence agency.
Wow.
Just one day, half a day a week,
Yeah.
on reception.
Can I ask, so you talked a little bit earlier about how, as a kid, you were like sort of skeptical, and then you kind of later on, maybe for the influence of your family-in-law, kind of went through a judgmental phase, which I think a lot of us kind of went to. Where were you like, at now, kind of, you were like in a place of doubting? Were you in a in a more compassionate kind of headspace?
I think I was still very much, because I think at that stage I was still in the Vineyard Triple C. I don't know whether when it changed over to Triple C. I was still in that church situation, and we got really involved. I should say we got very involved in that church. So I led a connect group, and I was on the worship team for a bit, and so we got really involved, and that felt like a whole new experience. I felt like I'd healed from
Yes.
everything that had happened. But it also, I think, freed me up. And really, I think my own experience of having depression, something shifted in me.
Yeah.
And I started to understand some of the things that have been harmful, particularly and more so with regard to my relationship with my parents-in-law and the harm that had actually been caused by them in the church and how much harm they'd caused to me. So I'd started to realize that, I knew that was really damaging and harmful. But in the new church here in Australia, I was starting to feel like, well, my relationship with God was still very much intact.
Yes.
So I started studying, and I started having these questions, but I didn't entertain those questions, and I just put them away. And I doubled down in the sense of I got really, like, I'd read a lot. I'd get really really into like the messages and very much into. I was never very good at doing my quiet time. That was something I always felt guilty about. Read your Bible every day and pray. I wasn't very good at that kind of thing, but I tried to do it. Never felt like I was good enough. Never did it enough. But I was still, I'm still believing it all.
Yeah. Force of will. I will believe this kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I had a lot of responsibility now. I had 2 children. Of course, I had to make sure that my children didn't go to hell.
Yeah.
It was my responsibility to raise them as followers of Jesus. And I was I would say I was quite a controlling mother. So their early childhood was very much about me I had very good boundaries. I was very consistent with my children. And I was, some would say, quite strict. I was probably more focused on raising good children than I was on building a really warm, connected, nurturing relationship with them.
I think a lot of Christian upbringings end up being quite hierarchical.
Yeah.
Dad at the top, mum, kids. And sometimes even kids in order of age. There's a strict hierarchy sometimes.
Yeah, there can be. Yeah. So, and I'm a timeline. I sort of get confused about stuff as well. And so I was at uni when I'm just trying to work out. I was 40 starting uni. My daughter would have been 9 when I started uni. And so, again, I was still very much a Christian, but I was learning stuff now. I was starting to learn how to think critically.
And you were also spending a lot of time being in this very compassionate kind of
open-minded environment.
And it sounds like your experience of the CCC Church was a lot less judgmental and prescriptive. They were a lot just sit down, big crowd, chill out.
And I agree with what you said earlier, much more compassionate,
less
and
judgmental,
loving.
perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. And more accepting.
Yes.
Very
that's
much
a good
so.
word, yeah.
Very much so.
Which puts you in a good mindset for maybe, what happens next.
Yeah. It probably, it's an interesting reflection. I hadn't thought about that, but it probably did. And there were 2 particular units that I did in my first year. One was a social determinants, so a social psychology unit. And we had to write this essay, a 1,000-word essay, which is almost impossible to write, as you guys will know. I've been to uni.
Yep.
Maybe it was even 750 words. It was ridiculous anyway. On the topic of compliance, conformity and obedience.
Ooh, what a topic for you.
I think there was a choice of topics, but I chose that one because, of course, that one jumped out to me. Boy, oh boy, did I learn a lot.
Wow.
I learned so much about that. And like the readings to me were like revelation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like, okay, because we were always taught about obedience. Obedience was so important.
As a positive
Then I
thing.
started to learn that I was actually the compliant child. I was the compliant one. And I struggled with conformity because I did not like conforming. But I always felt like I should. But there was always this little rebellious part in me. My headmistress in high school called me truculent once.
Truculent.
That's an incredible word.
She's truculent. Because my mum had asked me to come straight home from school. And I had to miss choir practice, which I went to religiously, because when I committed to things, I did them. And this one time, it was a particular time when the choir teacher was getting annoyed with people who didn't come and said, everybody has to be here today for choir practice. And there was one day my mum had said, really need you to come home and just be home for your brother, because he was 4 years younger than me. And so I told the choir teacher. She went to the principal, because I said, look, no, my mum has said she wants me home. Hauled me into the principal, the only time I've ever gone to the principal, because I was such a good girl. And I said to the principal, no, my mum has asked for me to come home. I come to choir practice every single week. I'm not one of the ones who doesn't attend. I said, and this is important. And she said, Sallyann, you're very truculent. I had to look that word up because I didn't know what it meant.
I would still have to look at it.
No,
What does that mean?
I mean, it's not an everyday word. It's kind of stubborn and determined.
Okay.
Yeah, headstrong.
Yeah, and
I
yet
see.
nobody would really have. Well, I don't know if nobody would have seen that. Probably my mum would have seen it in me. But once I decided on something, it was like, and you try to tell me otherwise, and particularly try to tell me off for something that's not fair. That was very important to me as well.
Oh, yeah.
Justice.
Yes.
So, why did I go back to talk about truculent? What was I doing?
Well, you're about to head into university.
Thank you for keeping me on track.
Not at all. Not at all.
And yes, it was the compliance,
Yes, the
obedience,
essay.
and
Yes.
conformity.
Yes.
And and at the same time, we had to do the self-development unit for our counselling, because I was doing counselling as a minor. And it was all about, we had to read this book about really kind of understanding yourself, starting to identify your authentic self. I mean, this is a word that never been used. Authentic
What's an
self.
authentic
It was like
self?
yourself. No, yourself. Put yourself down as far as you can, because it's all about Jesus. And for me, these two units just seemed to like something fell into place. And I started to, and what we had to do is we'd have a lecture in the self-development and that unit. And then for the whole semester, we were in a pair with one other person, the same person. And then we'd have group time together with the same group of people. So it was almost like kind of group therapy, really. And I just started to share this stuff. And as I started to share, I started to realize that my identity was the good girl, the easy one, the compliant one. And I was like, that's not who I am. That's who I've learned to be. That's not really who I am, because there's so many things I think and I want to say that I don't feel like I can. And so for me, I think that was the start. I started to figure out, like to start to think for myself, thinking critically and thinking for myself, allowing myself to think about me and who I was. And that just moved me further and further away from this idea of what Christianity told me I was. The church had told me what I was. Yeah. That's a bit of a mess for me, those next few years. Very messy. Because
The unraveling.
The
period.
unraveling. Oh,
While you're studying, also.
While I was studying.
While you're studying your degree, a psychology degree.
yes. Yes, with two young kids who then became teenagers and in the middle of all of that. And then, and my daughter won't mind me saying this, but then she, at the age of 13, I was dropping her after school to netball. Just as we arrived at netball, she was about to get out of the car and she said, Mum, I think I might be bisexual.
Oh. What went through your mind?
Oh, I was freaking out inside. Because that was, I hadn't even gone there in my thinking. I wasn't that far along. I was like, that was still not okay. And I remember saying to her at the time, and she and I have talked about this, she's now 22. At the time, you're only 13. Don't want to be labeling yourself. You're still exploring and finding your way. And of course, she's since told me she knew at 11.
Yep.
And to her, it was not a surprise. No, it didn't feel, and to her, it was perfectly normal.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, she didn't even know what bisexual or gay was until she read it in a book. And then she read this book and was like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So she never had hang-ups about it.
Wow.
I've got to say, Sallyann, that is something that I think reflects really well on you and your husband, that she was just like, oh, great.
Yeah.
And she took a little bit of time, but she told you about it.
Yeah, I know. And I'm so grateful for that.
But, and like the fact that she felt she could come to talk to you, but that's a really good reflection on like
thank you.
how you were with her, evidently, that she felt completely comfortable
And safe to say that.
right?
Because I know, and this has been a really big part of this whole journey for me as well. I dread to think how it would have been for her if I hadn't been questioning and on my way out, because as it was, she knew I wasn't comfortable then. And we didn't talk about it again for another couple of years because I was too scared to talk about it because I didn't know where I stood and I didn't want to hurt her. But she knew who she was. And it, you know, I'm ashamed to say it took me a few years to come to terms with that, because until I actually came to terms with not believing in
That had to all
the
come
whole
first, right?
belief system, that had to come first. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, oh gosh, I do dread to think what would have happened if I had been entrenched in that belief system and hadn't been open to that. I know things wouldn't have gone well. I couldn't have accepted it because I didn't have... my faith also was quite legalistic.
Yep.
Because that's kind of
Rules
how I
based,
was.
yeah.
It was very much because I had to do all of that in order to be good. Because I wasn't really convinced about the other stuff because I didn't quite know how that would work, being the whole, me being a sinner and then God sending his son to die. It never really made sense to me. How did that work exactly?
All the more spiritual kind of, the legalistic stuff was made more sense.
Made more sense to me.
Yeah.
Made a lot more sense,
So
yes.
the rules that you needed to follow,
Yeah.
the prescriptions.
Yeah.
I see.
So it was just lots and lots of questions, lots of confusion, speaking to my pastors, speaking to my parents, speaking to friends, and it just consumed me for years. It was all I could talk about.
Up till now, how had your relationship been with your family and your in-laws?
I was seeing my in-laws, and things had actually been quite good because I'd addressed some stuff with them. I'd written them a letter, and we'd had a few conversations, and things were going quite well actually with them. With my own parents, I've always been very, very close to my parents, my mum particularly. And so we would always talk about everything, my mum and myself. And I could have those conversations with my parents, like all my questions, because they came out to Australia for a period of a few months in that time period sometime, because my dad had just retired and they thought they'd come out here and spend a few months out here. And that was lovely. And, you know, they took the kids to school and did like rosters at school. It was really nice. And, you know, we had some really great conversations, which it was really interesting at the end. Or if I'd go back to Ireland, I'd have more conversations with them again. And each time I'd kind of go, okay, I'm good now. Okay, I'm all right now. Right. I know what I think. I know what I believe.
Wait, so you'd have some doubts and you'd be having these conversations about them.
Yeah.
And then you'd come with, okay,
they'd kind of convince me again in that sense.
Bring you back.
Yeah, and I'd be like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
But then as time would go on, all those doubts and questions would just keep coming back up. And I'd be like, no, but I just can't. I just don't. I just found myself just not able to believe them anymore. And you can't make yourself believe something that you don't believe. I tried. I did try.
Your brain is just figuring it out. Right,
yeah.
It's on this deconstruction journey, and you're along for the ride. Really.
And I wouldn't even read. Like I refused to read like the New Atheist stuff. I refused to read stuff that I knew would potentially persuade me otherwise. So I tried to read. I read a lot of Christian stuff. I read and listened to like some progressive stuff. For me, it was like if I was losing it, I was losing it all, because even if I could agree that, go way back to the beginning, even if I could agree that there was some being out there that created all of this, okay, so that's a possibility, you know? And okay, great. So the next question then is, well, what is that being? Who is that being? And how do we find out about that being? And to take a leap from that to, it's the God of the Bible.
Yeah. So many steps.
Way too big a leap. Because then I'd go, the God of the Bible, but we only know about the God of the Bible from the Bible. And the Bible was written by men, and it was written, and all that sort of stuff. I've read a lot of books like by Bart Ehrman. I've read books by other scholars. I've listened to podcasts. I've listened to arguments from both sides. But for me, because I was studying science, and I was studying psychology, and I was learning about the scientific method, I was like, I need evidence. And I think I'd always been like that, looking for the sign from God, and the dolphin not being evidence.
Yeah.
I needed evidence. And for me, it was like, that's what made sense. And I still to this day, I'm open. To evidence, but I don't see the evidence. And then at the end of a conversation with most Christians, it's like, yeah, but you've got to take it on faith. And I'm like, well, that's great if you have that faith and you've got it. I don't have that faith. And I tried to have it for a long time. And apparently it's something that only the Holy Spirit can give you anyway. So why is God not giving me this gift of faith? So it's all, I would get myself tied up in knots.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the worst part of it was the Christians I talked to, as much as they tried to help me, I could see for most of them that they just were a bit like, it's almost like their eyes glazed over. It was like they couldn't handle me. I was too much for them.
But yeah.
And the friends I had who weren't Christians had no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah. It's no big deal to them.
I couldn't talk to anybody about, and there wasn't, there were podcasts, but not like now. So this was, it was only 8 or 9 years ago, I suppose, maybe 10 years ago, when I was really, I think this whole area of sort of, people, this field of people leaving religion and understanding religious trauma and spiritual abuse, it's very, very new in that sense. And so here in Australia, at least at the time, there was a lot of American stuff. And I remember coming across Recovering from Religion, but I was like, it's in America. Yeah. And there was nothing online at that stage. Or maybe there was online, but from Australia to her. And I was like, but I want to meet people. I want to talk to people in person. That was important for me. But there wasn't anybody. It was so lonely. I felt so alone and so isolated for a lot of that time. And I did become depressed again during that time. Went through quite a hard time with poor old Tim, who, I gave him a hard time because I wanted him to question like I was questioning. I wanted him to be...
You needed him to engage,
I needed him to be with me on this. And, that was unrealistic and unfair of me to expect that of him. But I was just desperate. And I would get into conversations with anybody who would listen, really.
And how long did this period last? Because it sounds like quite a wrestle within your own self between the faith and the doubt and skepticism. How long would you say this period lasted?
That was...
I know that it can be quite vague because there's kind of a build-up. There's a build-up and then there's a sort of crisis period where, as you said, you're very obsessive for a period of time. Yeah. How long did that obsession last?
That would have been 3 or 4 years, I would say. I know. Yeah. Wow. I don't make things easy for myself.
No, that's hard. Like that's a really deep journey to go through. And it speaks to how much you really needed to know things very clearly.
Yeah.
Because for some people, I'm aware of some people who will just read one piece of information and they're like, oh, that's it. Like as soon as I read those words, I knew, right? Yeah. And I envy those people in some way because it's lovely that some people are ready. But then for others, we have different needs.
Yeah.
And we have a need to be very, very clear on a lot of details before we move ahead on something. Yeah. And it sounds like you've fallen the latter camp, which is like you took it very seriously. You really cared about it and you needed time to work through it. Yeah. And so I don't think it should be taken as a negative reflection that, it took you so long. Like, no, you had different needs. You really needed to know with a great amount of clarity, with a great amount of certainty, with a great amount of honoring your own research and your methods and your questions and being exposed to a wide variety of information. And so that was a lengthy period.
It was a lengthy journey. Period. I've often heard people say, it took me a long time. It was like a year or 2. And I'm thinking, that sounds long to me.
Well, yeah. And it's like you had a lot of reasons to stay.
I did. I did.
I know when I left, I was at a pretty convenient crossroads. So that definitely facilitated my leaving because I, felt like I was at this crossroads. And I think that's true for some people if they have that crossroads moment.
Yeah.
But for you, you're enmeshed in that community, or you have a believing husband, and all that sort of stuff.
And then children, the risks, of course, the religion telling you that your children are at risk, at very, very deep risk, if you do not bring them up.
That for me was, so a couple of things for me were the last kind of things to let go of. One was the fear of hell.
Yep.
And the fear of being wrong. So it was interesting because I've always been a bit freaked out by the idea of heaven. If I go to a place in my head and I imagine living in heaven, even in like a nice place, but forever and ever and ever and ever, I start to get a bit panicky.
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
Really weird. So the idea of heaven was not appealing to me at all.
Fascinating.
Yes. And then, but of course I was terrified of going to hell because that's living forever and ever and it's really bad. So at least the other one is hopefully a better option.
Yep.
And the other thing about heaven is apparently all we know about heaven is we're going to have these, houses. I don't know. We're going to live somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to worship Jesus all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, God, that sounds really boring.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
I just
very
couldn't
dull.
imagine doing that all day.
Yep.
No movies.
And then I tried to convince no books.
No books.
Oh my gosh. And then I tried to convince myself that, look, if somebody said you have to live here on earth for ever and ever, I'd be like, that seems okay. But there seems to be like a lot of variety on earth.
Yep.
And then I was like, maybe heaven is going to be like, it's going to be so much better. There's going to be so much variety. And then I'd have the thought of, okay, so if heaven is this place where you've got no more sorrow or pain, and it's wonderful, it's just the most blissful place to be, am I going to know about the people suffering in hell, or am I just going to forget about them? Are they going to be wiped from my mind? Because if I'm in heaven and there's no sorrow or pain or suffering, how am I just going to be okay about the fact? I'm not going to care that they're in hell and that they're suffering.
That's such
It's
an interesting
another one that
question.
didn't make sense to me either.
There's a lot of things about the whole heaven, hell, no more suffering, no more pain that start to fall apart after a little while,
Pretty
don't they?
easily when you start to think about it. I mean, for a start, it does sound like a very boring place. That's the
Very
first
boring.
part. I just couldn't imagine that worshipping forever. Honestly, I would have a physical kind of panicky feeling when I think about it. So, but for me, there was that fear of hell. And actually, my fear of hell was more for my children than for myself.
Yeah.
I could cope with the idea of me getting it wrong for myself, but what if I got it wrong and I was responsible for my children going to hell? That was the last thing that every time I'd kind of go, okay, I don't believe this anymore. I'd be kind of gripped by that fear.
That pushes back. Yeah. That fear pushes back.
Totally.
Wow.
And that took a while to and I was having therapy. I was going for counselling, definitely. And that was really helping me. I have a best friend who we met 23 years ago, and she's an atheist and always has been an atheist. And when we met, I was going to convert her to becoming a Christian. We laugh about it now because I'm the atheist and she's an atheist.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
But she was an amazing support to me throughout because as much as she had no religious understanding, she'd be the kind of person I'd say things to about, the padded room. And she'd be like, hang on a second, Sallyann. Hang on a second. Whoa,
reaction,
don't,
right?
what?
Yeah. What?
And so she'd give me the reaction that I really needed to have myself about my own experience. And she would listen to me. For years, she listened to me. She's just incredible. She's just been an amazing friend. And so I had her, and I had my brother as well. And my brother has his own story, which I won't go into here, but he is one person that I was able to talk to about some of this stuff. And of course, growing up in the same family, having had the similar experiences in the church, although he was 4 years younger, so his experience was different, and he got it, from the same family. We both experienced very similar, family environment and the church, so that was helpful to talk with him as well. So I didn't have those people, it was tricky enough as it was. So,
So was your exit period pretty much aligned with your uni degree? How long did it take you to get through your
actually
uni
it
degree?
was.
Yeah.
I graduated in 2015 and 2010 to 2015, 2040. So I took 5 years to do it.
Yep.
And in late 2014, over the Christmas break, I told the children that, so they would have been, oh gosh, I can't do maths.
So you were ready to come out.
I was ready to come out. So I was 45. I told the children, I built this up as like, this is going to be we're going to have a barbecue and the 4 of us sit outside, and Tim obviously already knew. I told him, sit down with the children, and I was going to tell them it was going to be this big thing, and I wound myself up to it, and I said, okay, guys, and the way I kind of said it was, I just wanted to let you know that I've been going through a lot, and I've had a lot of questions about what I believe about God and Jesus, and where I'm at now is I just want to let you know that I can't really call myself a Christian anymore, because as much as I've tried to believe, I just can't anymore. And they were like, okay. I'm like, so if you have any questions or any like worries or concerns, and I think maybe my son might have asked me one thing, and my daughter was like, not really, no. No, good. And I'm like, you can come and talk to me anytime. If you have any questions, come and ask me and talk to me. Okay.
Yeah.
They were grand.
That's amazing.
Wonderful. Were they super religiously involved themselves, or are they kind of drifted into their own lives at this point?
So they were still, okay, I have to do the maths. So I was 45. Can someone do the maths here? Leah was born when I was 31. What's that?
14 maybe
14.
then?
Okay. 14.
Yeah.
14 years old.
So, and Josh would have been 18, nearly 18.
Okay.
And they were so we hadn't been going to church for quite a while.
Yeah. Cool.
So that had been really kind of, just for them, they would just stop going to
it kind of
church,
faded
really.
out
They
for
kind of
them.
faded,
Yeah.
yes, to use a Jehovah's Witness term, isn't it?
Yep.
The fading.
Yep.
We
Faded
kind
out,
of, and that's what happened, is I kind of faded away from church as well, just gradually stopped going.
Yeah.
And so I, obviously, I said to Tim, if you want to bring the kids to church, then you can do that. I think they went maybe a couple of times, but not much.
Okay.
Because Tim was like, he wasn't really that bothered either at that point. And it's funny because, years later when my daughter and I have talked about it, she, because I always felt so bad and so worried about my children. So I told them that now what's going to happen to them. And I remember I really didn't want them to lose their faith.
Yeah.
I said, I really didn't want. So I think I said to them, this is my decision, but I want, you've got to choose for yourselves. And I hope you have your own. It was like I was trying to get them to stay, but I couldn't. It was really strange.
Right.
And my daughter said to me years later, she said, Mom, you can't even imagine the relief I felt when you said that. Because I never really believed it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I said, really?
Yeah.
Seriously, I was so worried. And she's like, no, Mom, that was great. She said, when I heard that, I was like, oh, good.
Excellent. That's so good.
I know.
Wow.
So, and then I told some other family members, and that didn't go so well.
Okay.
It really does.
Yeah.
It didn't go so well.
Yeah.
So they were really disappointed in you.
Yeah, disappointed
shocked.
and shocked. Yeah, yeah. And to be fair, I'd been kind of going through this for a while. And, when you tell that to people who are very dedicated and believe it's the absolute truth, and you turn around and say that, it is a shock for them, and they were devastated.
Especially you had been really historically very devout as well.
Yeah, yeah. I was probably the one out of the 3 kids who maybe was probably the one they thought they didn't have to worry about. Not to worry about, but I was kind of
You're very devout.
Yeah, I was very devout. I was good. I behaved myself. I kind of I was very responsible.
Christian daughter.
I was.
Yeah,
I was.
yeah.
So this was this was like a big shock. And things were said that were really hurtful, and there were a few years there where things were pretty tough, and I had to try to repair things, which has been good, has been positive. Then my daughter being queer, by the time she got to about 16 or 17, I was all good with that. I was, still not 100% comfortable because I had all that yucky stuff that I've been taught, indoctrinated into. So I was working to undo that. And just really accepting and affirming of her and who she is. And I'm a very proud LGBTQIA plus ally now, which is just amazing. I would never, if you told me 10 years ago, this is who I'd be now, I'd be like, no,
L what?
Ridiculous. L what, huh? That homosexuality
LG
stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's just, and she and I, well, both my kids and I we have incredible relationships. I'm really, really grateful for the relationships I have with my kids. They're amazing
lovely.
kids. And I love the relationships that we have. It's just such a joy, I think, because I didn't really, I suppose for me, there's been a lot of loss, a lot of sense of loss and grief around what I missed out on. Wasted youth.
Wasted time.
Wasted time. And wasted those early years of parenting where I feel like I could have been a better parent and I made mistakes. All parents make mistakes. And I acknowledge that. And I guess I've always apologize to my kids if I've done something wrong.
That's such a
I've
big
always,
thing, Sallyann.
I promise them when they go to therapy as adults, I'll pay for it. And if they want me to go in there with them and tell all this stuff, I'll be there. I just, for me, it's like I have nothing I need to defend. I have, I just love them to bits, and I just I'm willing to acknowledge any hurt or damage that I've caused them. And I think that goes a long way. It does go a long way. I'm very, I just love my kids to bits, and they're amazing people. And I love the relationship we have now as adults. It's fantastic. Yeah.
That's so heartwarming.
Yeah.
That's so nice, Sallyann.
Yeah.
I imagine it was kind of hard for Tim, but it sounds like he ultimately has always been a bit more of a cruisy kind of guy. So maybe that kind of helped him sort of.
Yeah.
Has advantages, doesn't it?
He's a funny character. He's in many ways, he's very driven.
Yes.
Career-wise. He works very hard. He's got a huge capacity. One of those people that, like, if you gave me the tasks that he has to do, I would just crumble. Like I'm, and I think most people honestly would. He has this huge capacity to take on a lot of responsibility.
Wow.
And to take on a lot of tasks. We're very opposite. He's a very quick thinker in the sense that he'll make decisions quickly.
Yeah.
He doesn't muck around. He'll go, okay, we need to make that decision. I'll go with it. He'll acknowledge that it might be wrong. So it's not like he thinks he makes the right decisions. He'll go, I could get it wrong, but someone's got to make a decision. And based on the information that I have and my judgment, this is the decision. Whereas I'll be like, I don't know. Now let's think about that for another 200 years before we decide, please.
I am the same. I agonize over every decision.
Me.
And my partner is like, bang, done. This finished. What are you worrying about? I'm like, no. We haven't gone through all of the pros and cons.
But even after the decision has been made, then I kind of go, have we looked into this? I'll do all the research and
let's reevaluate. Let's do an autopsy.
Oh, totally.
But isn't
second
that
and third
partially,
and fourth guessing?
Personalities aside and individual preference aside, isn't that part of what religion does to you? Is make you question your own voice?
You're taught to doubt constantly.
Totally.
Doubt yourself constantly.
Yeah.
Totally.
So, I'm not saying our intuitions can't be flawed and that we can't make bad decisions. Like, I'm really on board with, like, retrain your intuitions over time, get more data, etc. But doesn't religion do that to us? Doesn't it make us question our own intuitions, our own intuitive judgments?
It really does.
A little bit too much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And what you mentioned about Tim acknowledging, look, this might be the wrong call, but for now, let's make the decision. Sometimes that's the better way, because then you can, because all the agonizing that kind of religion kind of trains us to do, because if we step even 1 foot wrong, it's all over. You know, that's not very healthy or helpful.
Not healthy.
You might make the same amount of mistakes, but it takes you a lot more pain to go back and, you know, just make mistakes fast and fix them fast.
Yeah. And I think Tim is much more like that. So whilst he's very driven and very committed and dedicated.
Good under pressure.
Excellent under pressure. He's the person you want in a crisis.
Yeah.
I'm not. Not that I'm terrible. I'm better than I used to be, but I would have gone into the sort of panicky sort of mode historically. Not so much these days. I've matured. But yeah, he's great in a crisis. So, but in the sense of kind of day-to-day stuff, he's like, don't stress about it. He doesn't really stress. I look for things to stress about. He's like, if we don't need to worry about that. Like, I'll ask him, like, he had his calendar each day, like, he works very long hours, and his calendar is like chock a block all week, solid, right? And I'll say to him, like, in the morning, if he's home in the morning, the rare morning, what have you got on today? And he goes, I don't know, I haven't looked at my diary yet. And I'd be like, I've looked at my diary last night to make sure I'm ready for today. He just takes the things as they come and deals
Rolls
with them.
the punches.
So again, around religion, it's like for him, it's like, well, I think maybe what wherever he's at, I believe in God, or I believe this is, and I'll kind of go, well, what's that based on? He's like, well, I just believe it, I just think it, and he's like, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If it doesn't matter in that sense. So he's much more chilled about those kind of things.
Yeah.
Which, is good, because if both of us were like me or both of us were like him, things wouldn't work. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. But, there's been many times in our relationship throughout all of this where I'm definitely nothing like the person that he married. Let's just say that. And we've had to adjust to that. And of course, he's changed too. You should hope so.
Should hope so. Yeah.
In that many years, I would hope not to be the same person I was when I was 23.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we've done a lot of work on our relationship. And I'm really proud of us, because there were many, many, many times where it got to the point where we were like, most people would have gone, nah, this is too hard, because we've done everything we can do. So, but we've really worked hard at it for many reasons.
Absolutely.
But we love each other, and we've wanted to. We're also both very determined people with a very strong work ethic. It's almost, and maybe that's what religion has given us. That we're, when we commit to something, we commit. We have integrity, I think. And so for us, we were, do everything we could to, make this a good relationship. It's taken us a long time, but I think we've got there.
That's fantastic.
How many years have you been married for?
Oh my gosh.
More maths.
30 years this year.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
30 years.
It's a long time, isn't it?
Just to think about all of the distinct eras that a 30-year relationship contains.
Yeah.
It's more than one relationship. It's more than one marriage.
Oh,
it's like multiple different marriages.
Well, like, that's longer than the lifetime you had before you were married.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And we've actually been together for 36 years.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, right.
So that's a long time.
That's a long time.
Long time to put up with each other, isn't it?
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
And to have to change and grow, and that's hard in any relationship. So
Absolutely.
We've had a lot of support to be able to do that, which has been great. But I wouldn't go back, and there were times actually where I was like, if I just hadn't questioned.
Yeah.
Would have been so much easier
if I didn't
just
pull on that
stayed.
first thread of the jumper.
Oh, the amount of times I regretted that, but I don't regret it anymore.
No.
Yes.
Like, there's that point where, like, I don't know if you ever had that thought during the journey, where it's like, if there was a genie right now who could appear and say, it's not true, you're right, but I can make you believe it anyway.
Yeah.
Would you make the wish with the genie?
Yeah.
And there were times early on in the journey where I'm like, yeah, absolutely, my life would be so much easier. And then later on, you're like, no.
If I could push a button that would tell me the absolute truth, I would push that button.
So would I.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I knew all the way through. I was like, well, Sallyann, you don't want to go back. Like, part of me wanted to go back because I thought it would be easier. But being honest with myself, and that was the thing that I came to, was I need to be honest with myself.
Yes.
And that was what I said when I would share with family members and that's how I shared it. I've got to be honest with myself. I can't fake something. I can't pretend. I need to be just truthful and authentic. This is, and as painful as that is, it's still more important to me to be truthful and honest with myself than it is to follow something I really know I don't believe. Like, that's just dishonest.
Absolutely.
And
that honesty was like the cornerstone of your Christianity.
Yeah.
It's what kept you in Christianity for so long, and it's what took you out.
Took me out. Yep. Yeah.
Like, there was part of you that was always seeking the truth and took that very seriously.
Something very underappreciated by people who remain in the religion is that many of the values that you pick up throughout your religious life are exactly the values that lead you out.
Totally.
It's very underappreciated. I mean, especially in religions that are very focused on the truth and being the truth.
Absolutely.
You know, then you have all these people running around who want to know what the truth is.
Totally.
And it's like,
and I think if you really seek out the truth, you'll find something that's not what you believed before. And, you know, like, there's one thing I said a couple of years ago to somebody, and as it came out of my mouth, I was like, I surprised myself. I said, I can probably say for the first time in my life that I actually like myself.
Oh, that's amazing.
That was huge for me.
That's amazing.
And I was like, oh, wow. I actually quite like myself. And that was a big thing for me to say, because I just struggled, I suppose, with feeling either like I had to perform.
Yeah.
And that was never comfortable for me, because we go back to the whole thing of the fakery, you know, and being fake. I could never do that. And then if I was myself, that wasn't really okay either, because that was just too hard for people, because I'd become a bit pessimistic or cynical or a bit hard. You didn't conform. I didn't conform. And so it was like, well, I don't know how to be this person who's authentic and honest and nice at the same time.
No.
To me, I couldn't be, it was one or the other. And that did take me a long time. And I was like not very nice for a while there, where I was working this out and I was angry. But I think what I came to a couple of years ago was, I've worked out now how to speak up, how to use my voice in a way that's assertive and respectful and honest.
Yeah.
Not brutally honest, but honest and authentic, so that I can actually check in with myself. And, you know, if I say something to somebody, was I kind? Was I loving? Was I respectful? And was I myself? And I think that's important for me to be able to say yes to those questions, you know. The other thing that really came up for me is this idea of being good enough.
Yeah.
And I remember learning about John Bowlby, who was the child psychologist or pediatrician back in the 1950s, and Mary Ainsworth, who did experiments with babies, which you wouldn't be allowed to do now, and around attachment
theory.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what came out of that is this concept of the good enough mother, because of course it was mostly mothers who were spending time with the children back then. They were the main caregiver. And this idea of the good enough mother and this concept of good enough really stuck with me, because I was like, I could get on board with that. I think I could believe that I'm good enough, because good enough is not perfect.
Yeah.
Good enough is not always feeling like you have to strive for perfection and always failing, so never feeling good enough. That became a bit of a motto for me, so much so that I got it tattooed.
I was just going to ask you about
Irish
the tattoo.
on my wrist, which is Mockalore in Irish, means good enough. And for me, My daughter was getting a tattoo and I got one at the same time. I don't have any. And it was funny because the guy said, "Oh, is this your first tattoo?" And I said, "Yes, and my last." I'm not getting any more.
That's a good one, though.
It's a good one.
That's a really good one.
It's good. And I still need, I thought I need to be reminded of this. So I still look at it and I go, yeah, on those days where I have a few little doubts and I think, oh, a little bit of imposter syndrome sneaks in every now and then. I look at it and I'm going, all I need to be is good enough. I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to be the best. I can have days where I'm not quite my best self, and that's okay.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's very inspiring to me.
I feel like you've covered so much already, but like you've gone through the religion, and is there like, what's your life like now on the other side? You talked about that whole difficult process with your family, and you've rebuilt a lot of those bridges.
Yeah.
And so now where you are, what's life like now?
Oh, life is good.
That's awesome.
Life is good. It's not perfect.
Absolutely.
I don't want
Is
perfect.
it good enough?
It's good enough. It's maybe even a little bit better than good enough.
Oh, fantastic.
So I pursued my studies, and I went on and did a master's of counselling. And in that period of time while I was studying, I started working in family and domestic violence, which was also an interesting area for me to end up in, because I started to see the same power and control tactics and dynamics that happen in religion, in high control religious groups, in families and relationships. And then I moved into working in mental health, and then I've just recently opened my own private practice as a counsellor. So for me, that has been such an important part of my own growth.
Yeah.
Kind of hearing a lot now about particularly women who are kind of getting to a certain age in life and going, you know what, like particularly that middle age, kind of around 40, 45, going, I think I want to change things up quite a bit. And in a way, I kind of did that without realizing I was doing that. And this second part of my life, I mean, it's probably not the second, there's been lots of parts, but for me, this after religion part of my life is so much better. I feel, like I said earlier, like I like myself, but I have a sense of ease. I think that's the best word to use. I feel I'm not fearful about things. I'm not scared of the unknown. I have the least amount of certainty about anything that I've ever had in my life. And I'm comfortable with that. And I'm really comfortable with where I'm at in my career. I'm really happy with my relationship. I'm happy with the relationship I have with my kids. And I guess, I mean, I don't know. When people say, are you happy? This question, are you happy? I don't know what that really means. But I would say, having experienced depression and having experienced some really low times when maybe I wasn't depressed, but I wasn't really happy either. And there was a lot of turmoil going on. Now I feel a lot of peace.
And contentment, right? You sound very contented.
And when things come up, or I have, like problems arise, or I could feel myself becoming anxious and stressed about things, I now have sort of ways of being able to regulate. I have ways of being able to calm myself. I have I think I actually have a lot of strength within me, and I never thought I was a strong person because I always felt weak.
Right.
Because I was weak, wasn't I? Because I was weak without Jesus. I needed Jesus to make me strong. Whereas now I feel strong. And interestingly enough, I was at a funeral last week, and I haven't been to church for a long time. And for a long time after coming out of religion, I had that anger that was just sitting there all the time. I would just flare up. And if I heard Christian music, or if I flicked over to a certain radio station and they were reading a Bible verse, I'd turn that off. Like, I'd really reactive. I found myself in this funeral last week, and it wasn't an overly religious funeral, but there was a chaplain leading the funeral service. And I just felt so at peace. He just led it beautifully. He did talk about God, but he's a chaplain, so he wasn't preaching. He was just talking about what he believed and what the family, we're a Christian family, and this is what they would want, this is in the tone of what they were. They're not an overly religious family, so it wasn't like a Pentecostal funeral or anything like that. But I actually sat there in the funeral and I let these words wash over me about love and hope and comfort, those kind of words. He was talking about Christianity in those terms. And I just sat there and I thought, I don't believe what he's saying, but this is lovely.
Yes.
I'm finding this really comforting and I'm feeling really at peace. And I noticed that I wasn't feeling any anger or any need to kind of, that's ridiculous. Which I've really had for such a long time. None of that. So I think probably, and that's something I see a therapist. I've been seeing somebody recently, particularly around that, and of that sense of, I don't want to be angry. It's okay to be angry at things I need to be angry about, in order to speak up or to actually do something about injustice. But I don't want to be an angry person. I don't want to be reacting when I hear things about God or when other people talk about their beliefs. And I think I just had that sense last week that, I don't think I'm angry anymore. I'm good with where I'm at. I guess that's probably the best way to say it.
Wonderful. The anger has run its course.
It has, thankfully. Yeah.
I mean, the funeral, I'm getting this image of you at the funeral and the words that the chaplain is saying. And it just sort of reminds me of this reflection that religious people are just fellow Homo sapiens trying to find their way through a very scary reality.
Yeah.
We're a species that has an imagination that's able to imagine its own death.
Yeah.
Which is something that I don't know if we share with the dogs and the birds and all the other animals. And that's a terrifying thing to contemplate. Or even, we don't even completely understand it. It's very counterintuitive to us. And so they're just fellow Homo sapiens. And I love hearing you go through this arc of, at the end, this contentment and then this understanding of how we're all just fellow human beings. Yeah. And we're all just trying to navigate this thing
we're all
called
just trying
life.
to figure it out.
Yeah. And, they've come up with some answers to the meaning of life that we don't believe, or we have very good reasons not to believe. But nonetheless, they're fellow human beings that we share this planet with.
Yeah.
And I love that, because there's no need to do a lot of othering and tribalism. I feel like that's really what ruins life for many of us.
There was way too much of
othering,
that.
right?
Yeah, I'm not interested in that at all anymore.
Yeah, especially coming from Ireland. You're very familiar with the religious othering.
Othering,
right?
Yes, very much so. Yes, you're Catholic or Protestant. Well, I'm neither. And people would look at me and go, is there something else?
You're in big trouble.
They had no idea that there was something else. But I really like that. And I think that's, for me, that whole idea of othering as well. That's been a great term to understand that there's no need for that.
There's no need for it.
There's a need for it when you need to defend your position.
Yep.
And you're threatened by another position or another viewpoint. But there's no need. I don't need to defend. And there were times where people in my life wanted me to defend my decision.
Yep.
And I just chose not to go there. I'm like, I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that, because I think a lot of Christians who want you to justify your decision, they want to do that so that they can tell you why you're wrong and try to convince you. And I'm like, well, I'm not interested in that conversation. I'm interested in a conversation if we're both listening to each other and open-minded and considering that coming from the perspective of, I might not be right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm happy to be wrong. Any position that I hold is not I shouldn't say any. There are certain things I will hold that I do believe are wrong.
Well,
there are things I think most of us as a society commonly believe are wrong.
Yes.
When it involves harm to other people, harm to vulnerable people, to children. But apart from that, there's this sense of, let's have a conversation where we're willing to at least consider the other person's perspective or listen to it. Otherwise, it's not a conversation.
Yeah.
It's not really.
You you said there, like, you know, being open-minded. Like, one of the things that for me was like a real game changer was when someone explained to me that everything that you should believe should be falsifiable. You know, as in someone theoretically could prove it wrong.
Yeah.
And there's tremendous comfort when you realize, oh, actually, and what you said as well, like, I don't need to defend this. Whereas to a Christian who, or to a religious person, I should say, it's like, oh, I'm not allowed to stop believing in this thing. I have to defend it not only to them, but also to me, in my own brain. Whereas now it's like, you know, we could have our minds changed on things.
Yeah, we're open-minded.
And it's not always the sky falling. You know, you changed your mind on a bunch of things, and as have you know, us all. And that's really good. That's a good thing. And we can be happy with the result.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to hear that you're happy with the result, you know, whatever happy is. But it sounds like your life is good. Life is good.
Life is good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that it's wonderful having you in our lives as well.
Yes.
I am so happy I've been able to hear your whole story now from beginning to end. I was captivated the whole way through.
Aww.
It was fantastic, and it's always amazing to see like the uniqueness of of the story, and also all the commonalities, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
And
thank you for letting me waffle on for, I
not-
don't know how long I waffled on for, quite a while.
Not at all. It was wonderful. I wonder how much time has gone past. I don't even know. I couldn't even tell you. 2 hours?
17 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't feel that long.
I was only going to go for an hour and a half max. Max. I was not going to be talking for any longer than that.
You're too interesting.
Yes,
thanks.
yeah. We were hanging on every word. That was very captivating.
It was fantastic, and we are so grateful that you're part of like the Perth, Australia RfR community as well.
Thank you.
I
love being part of it. It's just been brilliant to be part of something where now I can provide that support for other people and be part of something that is providing that support for people, so they don't have to be alone. They don't have to feel like they're the only one going through this and there's nowhere else to go and no one to talk to. So that's why I got involved with RfR.
Absolutely. I suppose actually maybe to end out, I don't know if we're going to do a special ending, but I'm thinking maybe if there was someone listening to this podcast who is still in the like difficult part of this journey, they're still going through the woods, what would you say to them?
I would say reach out for support. Reach out to the right places for support. And sometimes that's a bit hit and miss because you don't always know the people that are going to respond positively or helpfully. But I would say get support if you can. And with RfR, there is online support as well as face-to-face support here in Perth. But there's lots now. There are some really amazing podcasts out there. There are lots and lots of books to read. But I would say to somebody who's in the thick of it and in the middle of it, is just to kind of keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going and trust yourself. Trust that you're going to get there. There was a point at which I could never have imagined ever getting through that and ever kind of feeling okay again. I could not imagine that. I just thought this was going to be my life of just turmoil until I died and then went to either one of those very boring places. One was going to be hotter than the other, though. But I would say, just trust yourself and keep going. And if you keep going, you keep putting one foot in front of the other and you get some support, you will get there in the end.
Yeah.
It's a real cliche, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's just when you're in the tunnel, like I always think, when you're in it, it just feels like one big mess. This is any challenges in life. When you're in the middle of it, it just feels like one confusing mess that makes no sense at all. It's only when you kind of come through it and you're able to look back and go, oh, I kind of see what was going on there. And that's what happened. And that's what I was thinking. And you got to trust that. Yeah. Trust that in a way. In counselling, we say trust the process.
Trust the process. Yeah.
And it sounds also a bit of a cliche. But sometimes cliches are cliches because they actually mean something. So it's about trusting that and trusting yourself. because I think that's what religion teaches us not to do, is trust ourselves, trust somebody else, or trust a book, or trust a God. Trust yourself.
I love that.
That's wonderful.
Love that. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And because you've mentioned that as well, one of the reasons we do RfR is so that people don't have to feel alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and trust in the process, and your brain is working it out.
Yeah.
Like, just sit and observe what it's like to have this wonderful, curious mind of yours take on the project of deconstructing a lifetime of religious belief.
Yeah.
And often there are some moments where you're just along for the ride, and it's like, what is my mind doing now? What is it working on? Like,
that's right.
Sometimes you'll wake up in the morning, and when you went to sleep, you had questions, and when you wake up, you have this strange resolution.
Yes.
Overnight, your mind has worked on this problem, and it's just figured one little piece of the puzzle out. And it can be agonizing in some moments when you're right in the thick of things, but we have this beautiful organ called the brain. It's very mysterious, and it's working on a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think that's another word you just said, curious. Curiosity is just a big one. And I always say I went from certainty to curiosity, and I love curiosity now. It's one of the best things. It's just to be like, asking questions, and not necessarily to get answers, just to ask questions.
Just to ask fascinating
and
questions.
to explore stuff. And it's great. It's great fun. I love it. And I think that's part of that is just, as you said there, let your brain do what it's evolved to do.
Making sense.
And go along with that. Yeah, making sense. Yeah.
Well, thank you for telling us the story
You're
of
welcome.
your brain going through that process. And I believe next episode it will be Sean's turn.
Yay!
Hot seat.
I'm so excited. That one will be over 2 hours.
Okay,
I
so
can't
lots of snacks
wait.
beforehand.
Yeah,
Or
we'll
maybe
bring
snacks during.
Yep, we're going to need some comfy cushions to sit on.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll need to upgrade.
We'll be very comfy. I'm looking forward to it, Sean.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
No, but it's been such an honor for me to open up space for your stories. So I could listen to you two talk all day. So it's going to be strange for me to flip it around.
You'll manage. We'll draw it out of you. Don't you worry.
I'm looking forward again to hearing it all in order. I've heard many pieces, and I'm looking forward to
me too. I'm looking forward to hearing.
Yeah.
I'm amazed. The three of us have known each other for at least 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And we've worked together in RfR. We've done countless support groups.
Yeah.
And yet still, when you two told me your stories, I learned so much about each of you that I did not know
Yeah.
before.
Well, there's so much to tell, right? Like, hour and a half tops, you say?
Yeah.
So, there's so much to tell. And,
Apparently.
people's lives are so rich and full of all these experiences. You just
Yeah.
don't have the environment to be able to sit down and lay it all out in order sometimes.
No. And when you guys keep asking me questions, I mean, come on, I have to answer them, don't I?
Absolutely.
So it's really your fault that I spoke for so long.
Wait, so the conformity is still running there.
Yes, it is.
Conformity is strong.
Probably always will be.
I'm teasing.
I know.
All right. Well, fantastic. I will see you guys next time.
Yep.
And
We'll be here.
We hope, dear listeners, that you have enjoyed what we've been talking about as well.
Hope so.
And we'll see you guys next time.
See you next
All
time.
right, see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today for RfR Stories Australia. We hope you enjoyed the program. We'd like to let you know about a number of resources that Recovering from Religion has to support you through your journey. On our website, recoveringfromreligion.org, you'll find 1. A resources tab, which contains an entire library of resources and links covering a wide range of relevant topics. 2. Other online media, including a blog, other podcasts, and RFRX talks. 3. A helpline that is available 24/7, both through phone call or live chat, where you can talk with someone supportive in real time in a time of crisis, or if you simply want to connect with someone who will understand with empathy. 4. Support groups, which run both online and in person in certain locations around the world. And 5. A directory of therapists who have been vetted and offer only therapeutic services using secular methods. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.